Hey, everybody. This is Ken Burns. I'm so happy to be with you this afternoon for the Next Generation Angels Mentorship Program. I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have over the next hour. I guess I'll just tell you a little bit. I wanted to be a filmmaker from as long as I can remember, and that probably means around 12. I watched my dad cry at a movie, and I'd never seen my dad cry before. And I sort of vowed at age 12 that I was interested in the kind of emotional safe harbor that he somehow felt movies provided for him, and that I would get involved. I ended up going to Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts, which was a brand new experimental college back then in the early 70s, and studied with two social documentary still photographers who sort of disabused me of my idea about becoming a feature filmmaker in Hollywood and got me interested in documentary. And then some latent and completely untutored, besides the normal high school classes, interest in American history, which was always there with me, welled up. And I became super interested in doing films in American history. And, I still can't believe that my first film out of college on the Brooklyn Bridge, that if you told me while I was working on it that 45 years later I would still be making films in American history, I would just say, you're crazy. That's impossible. That wouldn't happen. But I found what I was supposed to do and how to say it. More importantly, I found the collaborators who really make me look good, often unsung, that have worked with me for really a long, long time. In some cases, all of those 45 years. In the case of my cinematographer, Buddy Squires, my writer, Jeff Ward, has been around for almost 40 years. We've been doing what we were supposed to be doing. And so I'm very excited to meet you. It's been very much a part of my interest to activate young filmmakers working in history. And therefore, I'm so grateful to National History Day and to the Better Angels Society for making this whole thing possible, not just this afternoon's conversation, but this idea of what we're doing in the awards. And so I know you guys have been involved for an awfully long time, that you've had I think you were all watching at least the LOC Levine Ken Burns Prize in Film on the 25th, and the Students Teach the Teachers on the 27th, and you had your own film festival, which I heard was super well attended. So I guess let's just go around and introduce yourselves before we get started, and tell us who you are. And I guess we'll start with Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison Reed. I'm a freshman in high school, and I'm from Topeka, Kansas. My film was called All the World Loves a Baby, Breaking the 2-Pound Barrier.
That's great. Rashid?
My name is Rishi Shakib. I'm from Ocala, Florida, and I'm a freshman in high school this year, and my film was about a pioneering chemist, Dr. Harvey Wiley.
And Caroline?
My name is Caroline Bruton. I'm in the 8th grade, and I'm from St. George, Virginia, and my film was called Penicillin, Breaking Bacterial Barriers.
Wow. Summer?
Hi, I'm Summer, and I'm a senior in high school, and I'm from Honolulu, Hawaii, and the title of my documentary was The Cherishkova Effect, Propaganda's Role in Breaking Barriers.
Summer, where are you going to college next year, if you're going?
Of course I'm going to college, and I have not yet heard back from any of my colleges, and I've only applied to one early. I'll be hearing back towards the end of 2021, towards the end of the school year.
Well, we're all rooting for you. I'm sure you'll do very well. Sophia?
Thank you.
I'm Sophia Allman. I'm a sophomore in high school in Youngstown, Ohio, and my film was about FDR and how he brought electricity to rural America. And I just wanted to say thank you for being here and doing all of this.
Oh, this is today a fun day for me. I really mean it. I enjoy this, and I probably get more out of it than you do. I hope I'm helpful or can be helpful as we talk about what's happening. Juliana, last but not least.
Hi, I'm Juliana. I'm from Philadelphia. And I'm a junior in high school, and my documentary was about the civil rights activist Leon Sullivan.
Oh, yeah. In Philadelphia, yeah. That's great. Okay, that's wonderful. So let's for a while, for a few minutes, talk about your films and how you decided. First, how did you all decide on the topics for your films? What drew you to that? Had you been involved in films before? What got you into this? Maybe we'll just start again with Allison, if you don't mind.
Sure. I had never done a documentary before this, and I am really grateful to History Day for allowing me and lots of others to try new experiences like making documentaries that are super useful to us that we would have never tried without History Day. I found my topic through a book about my film is about Dr. Martin Cooney, who put incubator babies in sideshows to care for them, premature babies. They were not being cared for in hospitals in the early 1900s. So he put them in their incubators in sideshows so that they could be cared for, and so that the public, by participating in those sideshows, could help fund their care. And I really found that topic through a book by an author named Don Raffel, who researched extensively for it. And I think a lot of people find their topics through books like that.
I agree. I think so much of I like to say, for the people who my films are really written, and they're heavily narrated, most of them, and a lot of people sort of say, well, that's not a true pure documentary, which is nonsense. There are no laws, and in the beginning is the word, as far as I remember. And so we sort of begin with books, and we like the relationship with the word. We don't think the word and the image are in some ways enemies of one another, but in fact, sort of co-equal in what we do. That sounds really interesting. Tell us a little bit about how you got into film, and tell us about your specific film about Harvey Wiley.
So I've been doing History Day for a while now. I did it all 3 years through middle school, and I've been making films since like elementary school. So I've always been just super involved in filmmaking. But like Allison, I found a book by the author Deborah Bloom, and she, was talking about the work of Harvey Wiley and this poison squad, which tested different chemicals that were prevalent in food at the time to see whether they would be poisonous to the human health. And so it's through this process that we got the FDA, the first food and drug regulations, standards that would make our food safe to eat and consume on a daily basis without having to worry about what's in them. But I feel like that a lot of it is just based on, I know a lot of other filmmakers like myself have just been, once you find like a topic or a book, especially somebody telling a story in some way that attracts you, then you can kind of take that and build upon it and turn that into your own telling of that story.
Right. That's right. It's the digestion of material. And I sometimes find in more than 40 years of making films that it's the rare film of ours that we've actually broken new ground in a scholarship sense, in which we're offering, I think our Vietnam film did that, a couple of other films, the humorous one called Horatio's Drive, a couple of others. Mostly it's how you organize the material. Mostly it's how you transform the raw materials of photographs, voice, and synthesizing the story in a way that's fresh and not just a regurgitation of whatever was the inspirational piece or the several pieces that were inspirational. We're drawn to, all of us, all human beings are drawn to story. And I think that that's, for me, the most important thing is not so much the new ground that you necessarily break, but the new way you tell the stories that you're doing, which is most important to me. Let's do Caroline.
So I found my topic, I was originally going to do Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin, but then while researching, I realized that penicillin interested me a lot more. It was still related, but I found that I liked it a lot better. So I made my project on the discovery of penicillin and how it was manufactured and created, and its use in World War II, and how it got to the public.
That's really interesting. I have never in my life switched from a person, I've done lots of switching as I got involved with projects, sometimes adding people. We had a biography of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, but we realized it had to be with Susan B. Anthony because they were sort of the two halves that completed each other. One was a stay-at-home mom, Stanton. The other was a single and could go out and prosecute the women's suffrage movement. And they were the kind of founding mothers of the whole thing. But I've never left a subject matter that was a human being for a thing, penicillin. And do you get into the ancient history that the accidental application of penicillin earlier times? I mean, my father regaled me when I was young. It seemed to me then, knew everything, that in the Crusades, the Arabs often wrapped their wounds in moldy bread and found that they healed quicker. And what they were doing was some variation on penicillin. Did you come across that in your research?
I did not include that in my project, but I think I did find that somewhere.
It's just amazing to me that would happen. Okay, so let's, Summer, tell me about how you came to this project.
Well, I've done National History Day projects for 6 years now, and so I've made documentaries for 6 years. And a couple of years ago, I made my documentary about the Soviet side of the space race. And when I was researching that topic, I learned a little bit about Chershkova's accomplishment. And so when the National History Day organizers announced that this year's theme would be breaking barriers, her flight immediately came into my mind as a possibility. And in a previous year, when I was fortunate enough to go to nationals for National History Day, I visited the National Air and Space Museum. And I saw this little booth about the space race. And all they mentioned of Chershkova was in a 4x6 photograph that showed the cosmonaut group of the early space race. And the annotation listed the cosmonauts' names. And all it said about Chershkova was that she was the only one who was not a military pilot. And there was absolutely no other information about the first female cosmonaut. And I felt that her accomplishment broke barriers on so many levels, and it was so meaningful that her accomplishment deserved a deeper recognition. And so I really wanted to make my documentary as sort of an homage to her or a way to honor her significant accomplishment.
And where did you go to flesh out the insufficient information? What sources did you end up drawing on, or what were your principal sources?
I primarily relied on primary sources such as the magazines of Life and Time, and I was able to purchase those online.
Oh, great. Oh, good. Okay, let's go to Sophia. Tell us about your project, Sophia.
I've competed in History Day since I was 10, I think. But this is the second documentary I've made, and this is the first year, like in the senior category, that I made one. And I've always been really interested in FDR and the New Deal and everything. And I decided I wanted to do the fireside chats, and I was like researching that in the beginning of my process, and then I came across an article from the White House Historical Association, and there was a picture of with like a caption that like mentioned the REA, and then I looked into that, and I just like fell in love with the
That was
topic.
it.
So that's how I got into the REA, because I'd never heard of it before. But then like the more I researched, I realized like how important it was to our history and like how much I wanted to share about it. So
I'm a huge fan of the Roosevelt administration, and as you know, we did a series on the Roosevelts, and you could, even in however many 14, 15 hours, you can just sort of mention rural electrification, and it's such an important thing. And it's very interesting to note how much of how we are configured right now is based on the administration of Franklin Roosevelt. Some of the dams, not some of the dams, most of the dams, most of the airports, a good deal of the tunnels and bridges and schools and landing strips and hydroelectric projects like the Tennessee Valley Authority, and all of these things were really bringing everybody, particularly our rural areas, into almost parity with the urban areas, and the rural electrification, as I'm sure you know, is central to that. I love the fact that what I'm hearing is that people are not just being inspired by a certain source of a book, but you're also being flexible. You're being drawn, you're changing things. I thought I was going to go in this direction, but I went in this direction. And that's a hugely important stuff, because as you know, too often the documentaries are merely an advocate for some particular point of view. And that's easier than the kind of things we're doing, in which we have to take ourselves out and sort of balance the bad with the good, and also be willing to be corrigible, to be able to change and adapt and find a new subject if necessary. So that's great. It's really, really wonderful. And Juliana, could you tell us about how you got into film and about your film specifically?
Yeah, sure. So last year in 10th grade, I took African American history. And in the beginning of the year, we had to write a paper. And I wrote mine about the selective patronage campaign, which was launched by Leon Sullivan. And then when it was time to work on NHG projects, I realized that I wanted to learn more about Leon Sullivan because I liked the local history of it since I live in Philadelphia. And although I learned so much in my history classes, we never really focused on local history. So I was really drawn to that because it would hit home a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, and I was really interested in civil rights, and it was just a super. He had such an amazing like life and career, so I was super drawn to his story.
So one of the things I discovered is that when I meet other filmmakers that are making history films like you, I'm always struck by the fact that we've all kind of reinvented the wheel. That is to say, our own methodologies seem to be our own methodologies, and there doesn't seem to be too much uniform. Now, I know with National History Day, there's lots of guidance, and now people have been doing this for a while. And Summer, you've said you've done it, you've been working on it for 6 years. I assume there may be even 6 films to your name so far. But I'm curious about what your own strategies are for organizing the footage, the narration, what comes first, what comes second, how do you trade? Is the script written in stone and then the pictures added? Are the pictures collected and then the script evolves? I mean, as we do, we're constantly changing. If I moved you over to this side of the barn, you would just see endless numbers of drafts of scripts of the Muhammad Ali and Benjamin Franklin and Ernest Hemingway and other projects that we have going right now. So can you just anybody speak? We don't have to keep going through. Tell us about your strategies for organizing, and what did you learn maybe particularly from this experience of filmmaking?
I can speak to that. I tended to write the script first or write portions of it and then decide that is how I want to tell the story. And then I would look for pictures or maybe music or video clips that fit that rather than finding the pictures first. Because when you're researching, it helps to know what you're trying to say and then you can show that visually. And I tend to think more in words rather than
Uh-huh.
pictures. So that
Me
just
too.
seemed easier for me.
Yeah, me too. I mean, our whole strategy throughout has always been to sort of let the left hand do the writing and the right hand collect the pictures, so that drawn you're not looking for a picture that fits into paragraph 2 of page 3, first sentence. You know what I'm saying? You're drawn to a photograph because of its visual qualities, and then you're also writing a story, and then you try to horse trade between what you collect visually and what you collect in a written way. And I explain this sometimes to colleagues who make terrific films, and they look at me like I'm crazy. No, we got to go and get particularly what that is. And anytime there's a talking head, it's because what the last sentences of narration and the next sentences of narration, and they've got to fill the gap. And we've never done that. We go into narration wherever you see a talking head in our film, it's a happy accident. Summer, were you about to say something? I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I was just going to add a bit more about my personal experience, or at least for me. My first step is usually to come up with the narration, and until I'm done getting it down to 10 minutes, there's really not much I can do. And I always try to accent my documentaries with some sort of visual metaphor. For example, for this project, I immediately jumped to making a set of matryoshkas, or nesting dolls,
Right.
because I thought that it perfectly represented how one image or concept that is most obvious to the public can include a number of lesser known concepts that may even be seemingly incongruous with the widely known image. And I usually try to use a whiteboard to just write out all the major big ideas that I want to include. And then I try to see how those big ideas connect to one another to try to create some sort of outline for my narration. And I usually try to have a bookends with the beginning tying back to the end to create sort of a story arc.
Wow, that's so impressive. And I love the idea that the nesting dolls, no pun intended, encapsulate your space story. That's pretty good. Does anyone have something that's? I mean, we don't use storyboards, but once we've organized our thing, I can probably reach it. Hang on one second. So our Benjamin Franklin film is 2 episodes, and this is episode 1. You're never going to be able to read it, but once we've done it, we don't set this out first. But once we've done it, we start. This is anything that's white is a title. This is sort of introductory, general material, and then you're either in London or you're in Philadelphia or you're in Paris, and the color code helps us see the kind of respiration, the breathing in and out of the film that we're doing. So. That's just to kind of remind us. And if something's not flowing well, we can look to that, and you can almost just the sheer reading of the cards reminds you that something's not. There's very little room to interrupt it and change it because this is mostly chronological, as I'm sure you guys have found. But we do have abilities to kind of rearrange the molecules of the structure of each film. Anyway, does anyone else have kind of other methodologies that you want to share, or is it similar? Start with narration, add the picture. Nothing's ever set in stone until it's done, but that sort of thing.
I kind of would go. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
All right. I kind of go back and forth with it. So I kind of like to say that my script is never truly done,
Right.
because so like when I'm writing my script, I usually tend to fill it with as many details as possible and make it as convoluted as possible when I'm first writing it. And then I'll go in and I'll show it to somebody and I'll say, tell me the story from reading the script. And
Yeah.
so the details that they'll say and the details will be most likely the details that stand out in that script. And then I can go back and say, all right, this is the kind of things I want. Oh, I saw this, I really like this, piece of media, this photo, this film, this piece of audio that I would like to include in there. I have this interview, and then it's kind of like a bouncing ball. You kind of bounce back and forth
Yep.
from script to media. And then at the end, that's when I go back to timing, because I really, as much as NHG tries to restrict you on time, 10 minutes is a pretty decent amount of time to get out what you need to get out.
But Summer said that she sort of takes the script and gets it down to 10 minutes. Is that correct? And then
Yes.
and then you're going to start adding a picture. We're the other way around. We start with what we call blind assemblies, in which we work on the script on paper through 3 or 4 reads over several months, right? With the critics talking. So then I read the narration. I'm the scratch narrator. And then we have a local crew, the people who are on the edit staff will be reading the first person voices, and then we'll just put it together without pictures. And then we call that a blind assembly. And we'll listen to that once or twice. With the big series, it might be even 3, sometimes 4 times on a particular thing. And that first blind assembly of episode 1 of Franklin might be 4 hours. And we're looking at 1:48 when it's done, before the credits. So there's a good deal of slicing and dicing that takes place just of the script. And then we add picture, it balloons again, and then we begin to pare it down so that there's there's that process of winnowing at every stage. And it's very critical, not early on. Usually we've shared the script with experts, so they're always telling us what we got wrong and what's missing, where our emphasis is off. But it's only later, once we start editing, that we bring in what we call warm bodies, people who are not experts in that field and people who are not filmmakers, and let them, as you just said, tell us what the story is. What did you hear? What was, and that's where you learn so much, it seems to me. That's great. Anybody else? Sophia, Juliana, Caroline, you want to add anything at all to this process-oriented stuff?
Not this year, but last year I kind of made like a storyboard, like physical thing, because I usually write my script first, but it's never like even close to done in the beginning.
Right.
And I like find like a bunch of resources and pictures and videos. And last year I like printed out my script and then like cut out like sections of like each of the topics I wanted to talk about and like printed out pictures and just kind of like moved it around to see like where I wanted it to be. And I liked it better than like doing it on the computer because like I could like hold it and it was like more
Right.
But I think it 10 minutes is a short time. I kind of disagree with Rishi because it's really hard to fit everything that I wanted to fit in. Like I had things I had to like take out, and then I would find things like a month before my project was due, and I was like, oh, this has to go in, so I had to find something to take out because I wanted to talk about a lot about more the private utility companies, but then I found an NPR segment about rural broadband and healthcare, and I thought I just needed to put it in. And I'm really glad I tied it into that. So I'm glad.
I get it. I get it. I can't talk because, we have 18-hour films, over 7 or 8 episodes. But I know that 10 minutes is both infinitely long and impossibly short. And I used to say my very first film was the story of the Brooklyn Bridge. And in one small scene in the first half of the film, there's a fire in one of the foundations, caissons of the Brooklyn Bridge. And it lasts maybe 40 seconds. What I know now, 45 years later, I could turn that fire into 17 minutes of film. Now, I don't know what would be better, the 45 seconds it is, or the 17 minutes, but also as you learn to tell stories, you also learn to bear down and open up. So it's pretty interesting, and I know that frustration tremendously. Anybody else,
Mr. Burns?
Giuliani?
Oh,
Yes?
sorry. I would just have a question for you. I listened to interviews of your new Vietnam film, and you were talking about how to tell the story from all sides and to try and get as much. So I was just wondering, what's your process there of this stuff that's essentially like what makes up that's necessary in a documentary when you're making something like that?
I don't think there's a rule, but I thought in this case, and I was mostly sponsored by my co-director, Lynn Novick, who really insisted that we have a lot of Vietnamese voices. I didn't feel compelled in our film about World War II to have any German voices, any Japanese voices. We were telling an American story. In Civil War, we were telling an American story, which meant the voices, whether North or South, black or white, male or female, East or West, were American voices. And so there were a lot of them. And we're now doing a film on the American Revolution, the new war, among many others. And that's filled with lots of voices, loyalist and patriot, British and American, black, white, male, female, Native American, all sorts of voices that don't often get included in it. So I thought we learned a really valuable lesson. We knew that we were going to have a variety of experiences of Americans, from draft dodgers and even deserters to, Gold Star mothers and Medal of Honor winners, or significant sort of battlefield heroes, and everything in between. And we did. But what was really important was to hear from North Vietnamese civilians and North Vietnamese soldiers, South Vietnamese, our erstwhile allies, soldiers and civilians, and then also the guerrillas fighting in the South called the Viet Cong, allied with the North Vietnamese. And what it did is it helped You know, in science, the idea of triangulation, that you can fix a point more precisely by knowing two different places to measure that point. It allowed us to understand the war, to fix it, but also to remind us of the universality of human experience. When you hear totally different human beings with totally different experiences of that war describe war in exactly the same way, you know that you've touched on something universal, and it transcended the actual story, that is to say, the and then and then and then. And so I think from the very beginning we've tried to do that, and perhaps no more successfully. I think you'll be the much better judge of that than in the Vietnam series. um, you know, I'm sorry, Juliana or Caroline, did you want to add anything in terms of your methodology or experience or wrestling with the chicken and an egg, which comes first, the narration or the story?
I usually write my script first, and then I have people read it and tell me what they liked or didn't like or what was confusing. And then from there, I cut it and fix it. And then I usually go and look for images and videos.
That's great. And Juliana, nothing different?
Yeah, I think everyone kind of got the gist of it. I think just one thing for me, at least in my process, was getting a lot of feedback. Because there's a lot of like things that you don't notice when you're the one putting it together.
Yep.
And then you realize when you show it to other people and you're like, oh wow, like I didn't see it from that point of view.
I agree. That's the whole story of this. So before we move on, your guys are going to question me. I hope you have some good questions. It's already begun. But let's, I just want you to know, particularly the senior projects, that, and congratulations, which is the thing I should have said first to the winners here that we have assembled. Those of you in the senior category, you're getting an Anne Harrington Award. And I want to just let you know that Anne Harrington was a colleague of ours who worked at WETA, which is the PBS station in Washington, D.C., which is my producing partner. And for many years, more than 15, she was the person who did the educational outreach for the films, reaching you guys when you were in your history classes or social studies or whatever it might be. And she passed away way, way too early and was as close a friend as I had. And so it was a great honor for me that the Better Angels Society named this award for you guys, you seniors, in her name, and it just helps keep her memory and her mission alive. So anyway, let's move into the next round, and if you've got questions, ask them, and if not, I'll start asking myself stuff.
I watched, I think it was like your panel with Winton, sorry.
Winton.
And you mentioned like showing like the big picture and then also like paying attention to like small detail. Can you like talk more about how like you go about that, like showing like getting your like big message across, but then also showing like the little important things?
Yeah, I think it's important. You can see this in a lot of films like the World War II that I was mentioning, where you're not forgetting the kind of global description of what it is, but you're more interested. That stuff is just homework, it seems to me. And that the bottom up stories are the things that are the glue that makes those events, those dates, those facts, the stuff that'll be on the test next Tuesday, all the more memorable. You do well on the test if it's anchored in personal experience. So the easiest way I can describe it is something somebody told me years ago when I was in high school. And they said, as above, so below. It's often a spiritual or religious statement. But if you think about it, the architecture of the solar system and the architecture of the atom look exactly the same. And that to me is this kind of a guiding principle, that you find the same sort of configurations both at the macroscopic and at the microscopic. And I probably all of you, if you're film students, have somewhere along the line, some teacher has shown you Powers of 10. Have you seen that movie? It's less than 10 minutes. But it's basically, it's a British film that takes somebody, somebody lying on a beach, I think in Miami. It takes a square meter and then goes to the 10th power. and that by the time you go 10 to the 13th, you're in empty space between galaxies. Galaxies. And then it goes back down and then goes in microscopically. And when you're at 10 to the whatever, it's now in empty space between the electrons that surround, that are orbiting around the nucleus. And it was just, for me as a college freshman, kind of mind-blowing as it is, but also it reminded me of how you could relate to the figure. So I think that's kind of, Sophia, what we've tried to do. And it means that as you are accumulating the who, what, when, where, why of the larger story, you're peopling it, literally peopling it with human example. And I think the good thing about recent history is that we've pulled the camera back to reveal, as I've suggested, as we've all suggested by the choice of our topics, that it isn't just a top-down story, that it isn't just about white males, that it is a really complex, interconnected story of all of us. And there's something I just learned as I was promoting last summer of 19, our series on country music, which was our last big series that came out, that I had spent more than 40 years making films about the US, but I'd also been making films about us. So that is to say the lowercase two-letter plural pronoun. And that describes everything. That's the space I exist between the US, full of all the majesty and complexity and contradiction and even controversy and all the intimacy of us. And what I learned is that there's only us and no them. And that also helps too, because then it makes everybody, all characters, not just, simple villains to be tossed out or heroes to be exalted, but you have complicated and flawed heroes, and you have interesting and not always uniformly bad villains. And that makes us sort of challenge at least the superficiality of the stories we tell, or the assumptions we make, or the conventional wisdom we have. And so I think that's it, Sophia, in a way. It doesn't sound too complicated. It's definitely not summer rocket science, but it's storytelling. It's what we do to one another. And I think the best stories are the ones that bring as many people in.
I wanted to ask, what is your favorite and what is your least favorite part of filmmaking?
Well, the favorite part is easy. There's moments in filming, either archives, and when I was filming archives, you did have to film them instead of just scanning them and entering them in a system. And I put them up on easels, and filmed them. When I looked through the camera and I felt like I was in that photograph, and I knew that this photograph, whatever it was, it would be in the final film, or I was taking a live shot, or I was conducting an interview, and I know, oh, this will be in. This is fantastic. This moment that I'm doing, I'm sort of putting brackets around a not yet made transcript that's happening. And then there's a moment in the editing room where it's not working, and then you rearrange something. You take something out that you loved, and it's better. Kill all your little darlings is what the newspaper editors say to their reporters. There's a time when you take what ended and you begin it, or begin and end, or something happens and there's this alchemy. Nobody left the room, but suddenly this scene that was dead on arrival suddenly has life and dimension. And it's telling you a little bit about what went before it and what's going to come. And I just am ecstatic. And that's probably the most important thing. And then there's this evangelical part. Once it's done, and I'm sure it's true of all of you, the film speaks for itself, but you like to speak about the film and your experiences because it also teaches you, right? As you answer questions, as you hear other people's responses, you learn something. And so all of those three. There are really difficult moments, Allison, but I don't think I'd be doing this for 45 years if there was really terrible stuff. I just recorded narration, which on a big series is endless. Every sentence has to be said right. We're not doing it to picture. We're having our star, whoever it is, record it for the meaning of it. And I will listen like a hawk, and you expend so much energy over the course of a day to get a couple of hours of film's episodes narration. But then I think I can't possibly do this again. And then the next time you do it. So I'm not sure what part, not even raising the money, which you'd think would be tough. Um, I just sort of think this is part of it all. And I consider myself very lucky. I think I have the best job in the country. I hope that you will say that about yourself. I'm happy to be contradicted. And so there are times when it's wearying because you're juggling too many things, but there's not one part of the process that I don't like. What about you? I mean, do you hate one thing opposed to the other?
I had a very, very hard time narrating my voice for the film. I did not enjoy that, but it was
Yeah.
worth it.
No. It's hard. It is really hard to find the right voice. John Chancellor, who was the NBC kind of the Lester Holt of the 70s and 80s, he narrated my baseball series in the early 90s, and I had to break him of an announcer's voice. All right, the first narration goes, in 1909, a man named Charles Hercules Ebbets. He read it like a TV announcer. And I said, no, you have to read it like you're telling a story to your grandchildren. And so we fought and fought for about an hour, and then finally it broke like a fever, and he got it. And he said, oh, you want me to be God's stenographer? And I said, that sounds perfect. He goes, all of the import, none of the ego. And I just thought, that's it. So we talk about inhabiting the words and how we speak them. So that's great. This is, as John Lewis would say, good trouble. This is good friction to have at this stage,
I wanted to ask, because you were talking about how you were interested in making more like feature films
Yeah.
at first. So what really drew you into making documentaries
Yeah,
about?
so it's a pretty interesting thing. My father was looking at a movie called Odd Man Out, directed by Sir Carol Reed about the Irish Troubles. James Mason is the star, and he cried. And I've gone back and I've watched the film, and it's moving, but I was surprised by that. So when I looked like a chick imprinting on its mom, I said, that's what I want to do. I like that emotion. And what I was looking at were feature films. So I wanted to be an American feature filmmaker. In those days, that meant John Ford or Alfred Hitchcock or Howard Hawks. And that's what I wanted to be. And I devoured feature films. I saw thousands of them: French New Wave, old classical silence, the film noir genre, then everything, Italian neorealism. I just ate it all up. And then I arrived at Hampshire College and went up to my professor to sort of, I don't know what I was trying to do, kind of impress him with what I knew about the auteur theory and feature filmmaking. And he just looked at me like I was crazy. He didn't even say anything. And I realized that I needed to sort of think about it. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a feature filmmaker. That's terrific. But I was studying with people who had spent their lives carefully observing as still photographers the moment and periodically taking movie cameras to do the same. So I suddenly had my molecules rearranged at Hampshire College to be interested in not something that was made up, but the drama that exists either in the moment or was, whatever is or was. And then all of a sudden, I was a passionate person. I still have not lost my interest in feature films. I watch them all the time. I'm on the board of the Telluride Film Festival, and they show many, many, many more feature films, dramatic films, than they do documentaries, though they've increased that over the years as the renaissance in documentary has continued to flourish. But I realized that I was interested in that. And then, as I said before, it was just married with some latent and completely untrained and untutored interest in American history. My younger brother read novels. I read encyclopedias. I read history stuff. And I met a kid in my junior high who said, I saw you in ninth grade world history class. And I thought, this is somebody who knows what he's going to do. And I'm going, you're crazy. I wanted to be a filmmaker. And he goes, no, I think you wanted to be a historian. I said, you're crazy. I did not. I wanted to be a filmmaker or a writer or something like that. But in fact, it was the best of all possible worlds. And I got to marry that interest in filmmaking with what is, and then this interest in history to try to figure out. I mean, people, when they talk about the word history, get into the kind of feminist politics, perfectly reasonable, that it's not his story, it's her story, right? But that's a thing. History is made up of the word story plus hi, right? Which is like, welcome, come in, let's share something. And that's what you guys do. That's what I've been trying to do. And we're the same. We're colleagues now. I mean, you guys have, if you finish a film, then we're colleagues. And I'm very happy about that. But it happened somewhere in 1971 in Amherst, Massachusetts, South Amherst, Massachusetts, at Hampshire College, with Jerome Liebling and Elaine Mays, that suddenly I went from this kid since 12 wanted to be a Hollywood filmmaker to this.
I just wanted to say that your story is just so like crazy to me because I have like the same kind of thing like with my dad in movies, how I want to like get into film and like it's just crazy. Thanks
Well,
for
you know what, Juliana, let me just go down a little bit deeper and not bore you or waste too much time. My mom was sick with cancer. She got sick when I was 2 or 3 years old, and she passed away when I was 11. It was a horrible childhood, and my father had a really rough time with it. But one of the rituals after she passed away is that I had a very strict curfew, particularly on a school night. But if there was a movie on TV or even at the local cinema, he would take me there. And I have all these experiences with my dad looking at movies together, all sorts of movies. And then there was this moment several months after she died when I was no longer 11, but 12, when he cried. And I hadn't seen him when she was sick, when she died, at the funeral, nothing. And people had commented about it, and I was protective of him. You know, it's difficult to show emotion sometimes. And here he was showing emotion for something that was seemingly innocuous and not important, but it was important. And I got it instantly. I knew precisely that. And I've described myself as an emotional archaeologist. I am not interested in excavating just the dry dates and facts and events of the past, but the kind of emotional interstitial glue that holds all that stuff together. And it was born in that moment of recognition of wow, this is where my father felt comfortable enough to be able to express himself. It was a very powerful emotion. And in fact, that emotional archaeology I practice all the time. And for us to sit around and feel our films is hugely important to us. Summer.
This relates to my question a little bit. I was wondering about how to find our voice because I made a longer cut of one of my documentaries on the 1956 Hungarian counter-revolution. And when I made my documentary, I had no idea that that race could possibly play a part in it. And when I realized that it did, that the Hungarian nation turned on the predominantly Jewish Secret Service, and that the revolution had a hidden layer behind the Soviet-Hung conflict on a racial level, where Catholic and Protestant Hungarians turned on the Jews who were responsible for the reprisals. And I became very hesitant about going into this aspect of it. And in the process, I discovered that my own family on my Hungarian side harbored ill feelings when they found out that their side of the story, because their relatives were gunned down in front of their eyes in retaliation. And it was really difficult for me because when I asked my grandfather about this, that was my first time seeing him cry when I asked him about the Hungarian Revolution. And I was just wondering what your advice would be for handling such a sensitive or touchy material.
Oh, what a great question, Summer. That's really it, isn't it? I mean, it's okay to be safe and tell, and then they died, or then they discovered the thing, or what they were successful. We're making a film right now, not too far from your topic, on the U.S. and the Holocaust. What we knew and when we knew it, what we did and what we didn't do, what we should have done. And it goes back to anti-immigration laws and racism in the United States. The Nazis came over early in their power to study our Jim Crow laws in order to apply them to the exclusionary laws against the Jews. They stuck around for eugenics, this pseudoscience adopted by conservatives and liberals, progressives alike, that was suggesting that through sterilization and other scientific manipulations that you can cure all of these things when it is in fact insane murder or um, uh, just horrible manipulations of people, torture. And you gotta face it. You know what I mean? You have to just, Eleanor Roosevelt said, you gotta, who was a very, very fearful person her whole life. She just said you kind of had to wake up. You know this, Sophia. You have to kind of wake up and move right towards the thing that scares you. So I think topic wise, particularly because we've agreed not to advocate for one particular point of view, that we want to be able to hold as many different things. Um, you know, Sophia, you brought up the question about Wynton Marsalis, and when we were talking in my jazz series, Wynton at one point says, sometimes a thing and the opposite of a thing are true at the same time. Both of them true. That's what we have to be able to do in our work, is when we're faced with those kinds of almost debilitating contradictions, and some of them are hugely personal and hugely emotional, as Summer's relating, we're obligated to try to figure out a way to honor the things. It's not about being balanced. You know, it's not inviting the flat earth society into a discussion about global affairs. The earth is not flat. This is not fair and balanced. What we want to do is be able to recognize that sometimes the opposite is also true, that the other person has a different kind of truth, and one is not necessarily different. Now, there's some things that are absolute. Murder is murder. We know that. But it's really important to be nuanced in that way, and I think it takes a lot of courage, Sumner, and it's because it's not an easy thing to do, to pursue these things that upset your grandfather, and you know, stir up a hornet's nest of stuff. But I think that we're not doing it for the sake of doing it. We're not provocateurs. But we're obligated to dive down. You know, there's a huge big discussion, as I'm sure you're aware, about the 1619 project that the New York Times wrote a year and a half ago, or a year plus ago. Essentially, one of the things it postulates is that almost everything in America is governed by race, and the fact that we could have been founded on as a country dedicated to human rights, but have and tolerate chattel slavery from way before our founding, 150 years or more before our founding, 1619, when the first Africans came to what is the colonies of the United States. It's even predates that. It goes back to the 1500s if you count Florida and other Latin American locations. But to see it entirely for that is to miss a point too. There's a Dunmore proclamation that took place in Virginia in which a lot of planters signed up in support of the revolutionary cause because they presumed that the new country that they wished to create wouldn't abolish slavery. Correctly, they presumed that. And partly it was their participation that helped perpetuate slavery. And they were afraid that somehow staying with the British Empire, that there was movement afoot. And besides nascent movements in Pennsylvania of Quakers, there was very little talk of abolition or emancipation or anything like that. So, but does that mean the entire revolution is based on that? It's a really good question, and we have to engage it. And we're running right towards that storm for our American Revolution Project Summer.
Thank you.
Very drawn to the emotional aspects, and I loved bringing it to rural broadband and healthcare, just because I feel like it's so important, and I'm so glad I got to shed light on that. And I recently made a very short film about the Holocaust, and I was able to tie it into what's going on in Syria and India, the United States, and I've always been very interested in that, in showing the emotional.
We don't have much time left, mainly because I gabbed, but people like to say history repeats itself, and you guys know it never has. There's never been an event that's been exactly like another event. We also
I'm assuming you're pulling for the Mark Twain quote here.
I am headed right there, Rashid. That's exactly where I'm going. People say we're condemned to repeat what we don't remember. That's attributed more often than not to George Santayana, but also is in parts of discussions of Holocaust studies. but that's not true either, unfortunately. I think that human nature remains the same. The Ecclesiastes said it: what has been will be again, what has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. And that nothing new is human nature. It doesn't change. And that's sort of both terribly depressing, but also we do notice places where there's shifts and positive movements. So it does incrementally change, but human nature is the same. And so what we see are repeated themes and motifs. And Mark Twain is supposed to have said, we can't find any proof that he actually did it. So maybe it's just a newspaper man remembering it, or somebody's attributed to him. He said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I think once you've got, and I think Summer probably has as much experience as anyone here, you begin to tell stories, and you begin to see that there are these motifs, there are these themes, there are these evergreen ideas. And we started with the Better Angels Society, a whole website called Unum. You know, people complain there's too much pluribus, not enough unum in the United States. Well, Unum is just curating the evergreen themes of our films so that we can have a conversation between those past events and the present. And it's easier in some ways for some people to not get so twisted up in their own personal politics, particularly now where everything is so divided and so partisan, than it is to just share a history in common and then realize that it's so much like today. And so that's, my biggest thing. I know we're supposed to talk about the future of documentary films, but to me, I'm looking at it and I'm so proud of you. I'm so excited for what you've done. I hope you'll continue this work. I'm not asking you to do it if that's not what you're supposed to be doing, to follow. Emerson says in Self-Reliance, have you had to read his essay on self-reliance? You will when you get to college, if you haven't been done in high school. He said to do whatever inly rejoices. And I hope that all of you, all 6 of you, are able to do what inly rejoices. It's a wonderful, it's not a made up word, I guess, but it's a new use of a word. I would never say inly in general conversation, but we know what Emerson meant. In order to fulfill whatever kind of American destiny that we have, we are obligated to listen to something that is a combination of our own inner voice and some conscience, and then work conscience, meaning an awareness that there's something bigger than you, however you understand that. It may be nature, it may be reason, it may be God, it may be whatever it is. And that we negotiate between that inner voice of what we need to do and this conscience to be able to do the kinds of work we've done. And already you've proved yourself at such a relatively early age. I know you're so sick of people being telling you you're young. I've got 4 daughters myself, 2 of whom are grown and I work with. But the opportunity to practice who you are, and whatever thing you choose ultimately, that's the most important thing. The poet Robert Penn Warren, the novelist Robert Penn Warren, told me early on in my life, he said, careerism is death. He just riveted me, scared the hell out of me, because all we ever talk about is what's your career, what you're going to do. I now have consciously never used the word career. I say professional life, because what he's saying is that it's so easy to slip into the rut and lose yourself and wake up way down the line and have missed something. Clearly, you're all not. I'm so impressed with what you've done. I'm impressed with the way you articulate what you've done. I hope you continue to do this. And if you don't, whatever it is you do, I wish you, from the bottom of my heart, with all sincerity, that it inly rejoices. So I think we've run out of time today. You guys have been spectacular. Be well, be careful out there, right? Wear your masks. Okay. I'm sure your parents say that to you every day. Wear your masks, and we'll bump into each other. I hope all of you as colleagues, as we are now, at some other point when we can share our films again. And congratulations about your Next Generation Awards. It's really hard earned, and these are all impressive projects. So thank you very much. And till we meet again.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.